5-1 up, in the tiebreak, 1 point away, again and again, from closing it out. And then, nothing went right of either. By the end of the night, the world number 1 was out of the Cincinnati Open, beaten by a 20-year-old nobody saw coming, and her grip on the top ranking, a spot she has held for 96 straight weeks, is suddenly not so safe anymore. In this video, we're breaking down exactly how Aryna Sabalenka let this match slip through her fingers, twice, what it means for her number 1 ranking, and why this loss could not have come at a worse time, with the US Open just days away. Let's set the scene properly, because context matters here more than almost any other match this season. Aryna Sabalenka came into this Cincinnati round of 16 match as the top seed, the world number 1, and heavily favored, not just on paper, but in reputation, in recent form, in every category that usually decides these matchups before a ball is even struck. Her opponent? Sara Bejlek, 20 years old, unseeded, ranked 35th in the world, a name that, until this tournament, most casual tennis fans had never even heard. On paper, this should not have been close. Sabalenka is a 4-time Grand Slam champion. She has spent the better part of 2 years as the most feared player on the WTA Tour, a player whose serve alone has ended matches before opponents ever settled in. Bejlek, on the other hand, had never beaten a top 10 player in her career. Not once. 3 previous attempts against elite opposition, 3 losses. Every piece of history pointed in one direction. But tennis doesn't always follow the script, and this Aryna Sabalenka news is proof of exactly that. The match itself lasted just under 2 hours, and for most of it, Sabalenka actually looked like she was in control, composed, dictating rallies, doing the things that have made her nearly untouchable at this level. That's precisely what makes this collapse so hard to explain. This wasn't a match where the world number 1 was overwhelmed from the first point. This was a match she had, twice. Here's where it gets painful for Sabalenka fans to watch. In the first set, Sabalenka built a lead in the tiebreak, not a small one. She went up 5 points to 1. Let that sink in for a second. In a format where every single point carries enormous weight, being up 5-1 is about as close to a finished set as you can get without actually finishing it. That's the kind of lead that, 99 times out of 100, a world number 1 closes out without much drama, without much doubt, without much conversation afterward. Instead, something shifted. Point by point, Bejlek clawed her way back. No panic, no rushing, just patient, composed tennis from a 20-year-old who, by every reasonable expectation, should have been the one feeling the pressure. She stole the tiebreak away from the world number 1. First set gone. Now, most players would be rattled after blowing a lead like that. The mental toll of losing a set you had all but wrapped up is significant. Ask any professional and they'll tell you those are the losses that linger, the ones that follow you into the next set whether you want them to or not. But Sabalenka regrouped. Credit where it's due. She didn't fold. In the second set, she built another lead, 4 games to 1. Again, a commanding position. Again, the kind of lead that should have sealed the match, should have ended the conversation, should have sent this story in a completely different direction. And once again, it slipped away. Bejlek fought back, game after game, refusing to let the moment overwhelm her. She leveled things up, found her range, found her nerve, and eventually served out the match herself, against the best player in the world, on one of the biggest stages in tennis outside of the majors. And that's where things changed. Not just on the scoreboard, in the entire narrative around this tournament. The numbers tell their own story here, and they're worth sitting with for a moment. Sabalenka finished the match with 4 double faults, and 0 aces. 0. For a player whose serve is considered one of the most dangerous weapons in the entire sport, a weapon that has bailed her out of trouble in matches far tougher than this one, that statistic alone tells you something was off. Her first serve, usually a source of free points and cheap holds, landed in only half the time she attempted it. Bejlek, on the other hand, hit 3 aces, didn't double fault a single time, and landed 2/3 of her first serves. On this particular night, in this particular match, the 20-year-old simply outperformed the world number 1 in the exact categories that usually decide these matches. Not through luck. Through execution, under pressure, when it mattered most. So what did the player who pulled off this upset actually say afterward? Sara Bejlek could barely find the words. In her on-court interview, she said she'd lost her words completely, that it felt incredible, that she was super happy, and that she genuinely didn't know what else to say in that moment. There's something genuinely human about that kind of reaction. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't a player who expected to be standing there. She also talked about her mindset during the comeback, saying she kept hoping, kept believing that the match could turn around at any moment. And it did. Twice, in fact, when you consider both the tiebreak and the second set deficit she had to overcome. Think about what this win actually means for her, beyond the scoreline. This was Sara Bejlek's first ever victory over a top 10 player in her career. Her first ever WTA 1000 quarterfinal. And out of every possible opponent, every possible stage, she picked the biggest one imaginable to break through. Against the world number one herself, in front of a crowd that came expecting a routine result. But the bigger story came after the match. And this is the part that turns a single upset into something with real consequences for the rest of the season. Because this isn't just about Sabalenka losing one match to an unseeded opponent. This loss puts her ranking in direct danger, a danger that extends well beyond Cincinnati. Aryna Sabalenka has held the world number one ranking for 96 consecutive weeks. Say that number slowly, because it deserves it. That's not a small streak. That's nearly 2 full years at the very top of women's tennis, fending off every challenger, defending points week after week, tournament after tournament. And depending on how the rest of Cincinnati plays out, Elena Rybakina now has a real, tangible path to overtaking her for that top spot. If you're new here, this is exactly the kind of story we cover. The moments that change the entire shape of a tour, not just a single scoreline in isolation. Consider subscribing so you don't miss the next update on this ranking battle, because it is far from settled. Now here's what makes this loss sting even more than the numbers already suggest. This wasn't a one-off bad week for Sabalenka. This wasn't an isolated slip against a hot opponent on a bad day. This was her third straight tournament ending at exactly this stage, the round of 16. She was knocked out at the same point at Wimbledon, the same point in Toronto, and now the same point in Cincinnati. 3 different tournaments, 3 different opponents, 3 different surfaces and settings, and the exact same result. And it goes further than that. This was Sabalenka's 7th straight tournament without winning a title. 7. For a player who spent most of the past 2 years as the most dominant woman in tennis, a player who, not long ago, seemed to be adding trophies almost automatically, that is a significant shift. This isn't random bad luck anymore. When a pattern repeats itself this consistently across this many events, it stops being an anomaly and starts being something that demands an explanation. And the timing could not be worse. The US Open begins in just days. For Sabalenka, this tournament is being viewed by many as her last real opportunity in 2026 to win a Grand Slam title, a chance to silence the growing questions before they get louder, before the narrative fully shifts away from her. So the question fans are now asking is simple, but it's not an easy one to answer. Is this Cincinnati collapse a warning sign heading into New York? Or can Sabalenka reset in time, the way champions of her caliber so often do when their backs are against the wall? Let's flip the story for a moment, because there's a second angle here that makes this even bigger than just one bad result for the world number one. Sara Bejlek didn't just beat one big name to get here. Her run through Cincinnati has been built entirely on upsets, one after another. She's already knocked out other seeded and former top-ranked players on her way to this stage, and now she's added the world number one to that list, arguably the biggest scalp any player can claim in this sport. This is Bejlek's first WTA 1000 quarterfinal of her career, and earlier this year she also won a hard court title as a qualifier, which tells you this breakout run in Cincinnati isn't some isolated fluke, some one-week miracle that will disappear as quickly as it arrived. It's part of a bigger rise. A trajectory that's been building, quietly, for months. She now moves on to face an experienced opponent in the next round, and after a win like this, a win over the world number one, achieved by fighting back from 2 separate deficits, there's a real argument that the pressure has shifted entirely. Bejlek has nothing to lose right now. She's already exceeded every reasonable expectation placed on her heading into this tournament. Everyone else remaining in the draw does have something to lose. That psychological difference matters more in tennis than people often give it credit for. And that's exactly why this story isn't finished yet. Not close to it. Because you now have 2 completely different storylines colliding in Cincinnati, running in opposite directions at the exact same moment. One player whose season is starting to look shaky right before the sport's biggest remaining stage of the year. And another whose career best moment might just be getting started, with momentum and belief on her side heading into the next round. So let's bring this back to where we started, because it's worth restating clearly, without any spin. Aryna Sabalenka had this match. twice. A 5-1 tiebreak lead. A 4-1 second set lead. Both times it disappeared, slipping through her fingers against an opponent she was expected to beat comfortably. That's not just an upset. That's a pattern that fans, analysts, and Sabalenka herself will need to answer for heading into the US Open. 3 straight round of 16 exits, 7 tournaments without a title, and now a serious threat to a #1 ranking she's held for 96 weeks straight, a streak that once felt untouchable and now suddenly feels much more fragile. None of this means Sabalenka's story is over. Great champions have bounced back from far worse setbacks than this one, and there is plenty of tennis left to be played this season. But right now, with the US Open on the horizon and every eye in the sport watching closely, the questions around her are louder than they've been in a long time. And that's exactly the story we're going to be tracking next, how this Cincinnati collapse could shape Sabalenka's US Open campaign, and whether Elena Rybakina is about to become the new world #1 before the tournament even begins. Make sure you're subscribed, because that update is coming soon.